no one has spoken yet, right? Just to make sure.
And welcome to everyone. I am calling the May 3rd, it's second or third, May 3rd, 2022 Audit and Finance Committee meeting to order. Can I get a motion on the adoption of the agenda?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Approval of the April 3rd, April 5th minute as presented, unless someone have some changes that need to be made to the minutes. If not, I'll entertain a motion to
So
approve.
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the Head Start fiscal year 23 applications. Spotsworth.
Good afternoon, Ms. Green, Ms. Coates, Audit and Finance members. The Office of Head Start has allocated COLA and quality improvement supplemental funding to grantees. We are requesting the approval of the application budget to be used for any board-approved COLA adjustment for the next school year.
Are there any questions?
So I have one question. And I think it might be for Mr. Brigman, but what other increases in salary do these staff get based on our salary schedules, our COLAs, our state employee factors, in addition to the salary adjustments presented here?
Did you hear the question, Bill?
I did not. I'm sorry. I didn't think about it.
Does this request include all increases for this staff, or would they be eligible to receive any other funding that's coming into employees?
So they would be on the same salary structure as all employees. So if there's an increase for 2023, they would be part of that.
In addition to this?
I have not.
Oh, okay. I think I was under the impression that they are funded federally, so that their increases coincide with what the state tells us we need to do, but the actual funding comes from the Head Start program.
Correct.
Yes.
That is correct, Ms. Green. We just, they give us the funding ahead of time, the way the Office of Head Start works. And so we do not give the funding or the COLA until the board approved the budget and the COLA for the rest of the school district employees.
Questions, Cindy?
No, it doesn't. So do these employees get the same COLA as all the other staff employees that work for CCSD on top of what you have requested from this grant?
No.
No.
And
No,
they do not qualify for step increases.
They
They get what all of our staff receive. If our staff gets a cost of living and a step increase, they would as well.
That's exactly what I'm asking. So if our staff gets a step and a COLA, these folks, we'll just use just the top example. The person that's getting a $2,400 raise gets that plus a step increase.
Kim, you can probably speak to this,
Sure.
but this is making sure you have the money set aside for whatever step and COLA is in place for 23 for all staff, correct?
That's exactly correct. It's only whatever the board approved. This is the Head Start funding to pay for what you approve. Is not.
Thank you. Now I
on top of the
understand.
district.
Right, it's the other way. So it's
Yeah.
not they get this and the step and COLA. It's if they qualify for a step and COLA, this is the funding source that pays for it.
That is
Thank you.
correct.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Foxworth.
Thank you.
The next item is the capital program, phase 4. Ms. Shaw.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Green and audit finance members. This item is a request for approval to reallocate $1.5 million of excess revenues within our phase 4 capital program sales tax program. This will be for the advanced design of a 900 student Morningside Middle School. We have seen a steady surplus above the projected 2.5% growth within our phase 4 program. And this particular reallocation will allow us the opportunity to stay on schedule for a 2025 school year opening. That's all I have for this item.
Are there any questions regarding this request for reallocation?
Just a couple quick questions. I'm presuming this was sort of the top on the list of the next item, which is why that's where the excess revenues are going. And then I'm also just curious, it's a round number amount. Is this the amount that we had, and so we're applying it all to the advanced design, or is this exactly what we think the advanced design is, and we're just taking this much of the excess revenue?
So we're requesting what was approved under the phase 4 program originally when the referendum was put out. So we're just requesting that amount.
So we had already requested this $1.5 million previously. We just now have the funding for it?
That's correct.
Got it. Thanks.
So this was not on the referendum.
This item was on the referendum under the phase 4 program.
Was it? So I think that's where the confusion is coming in. If it was funded through the referendum, why do we have to use savings to fund it?
Oh, I understand. It was on the unfunded list. Yes,
Thank
ma'am,
you.
within the phase 4 program. And so now we are funding it with the excess revenues. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Can I ask one construction question real quick, Ms. Green?
Sure. Just a minute. Ken,
Yeah.
were you finished with your questions? I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Now you can.
So Jeff, can you speak to, have we done anything on this advanced, or will we do anything in this advanced design to move the entrance to that school? I'm talking about the entrance to the property, not the front door.
We will include it in the analysis.
But we don't know that we can do that yet, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further questions? If not, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, Ms. Shaw, yep, item 6 is, you can keep going, Ms. Shaw.
Okay, the next item is an informational item where we are doing a redistribution of the early out number 2 ban, which extends from 2022 to 2023. And this particular item is for a 1-page conceptual design layout of the James Island Early Childhood Center, as well as the D10 Middle School. We are doing this in preparation for upcoming potential community meetings forthcoming. And this will also allow us the opportunity to understand the academic programming piece and how big the building needs to be in order to accommodate those learning needs. This will also allow us to identify any potential parking or stormwater issues that we can identify up front and get ahead of any potential issues that could occur. That's my item as reported.
And that's for information, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions from any of the committee members? If not, thank you, Ms. Shaw.
Thank you.
Approval of contractual projects over $250,000. Mr. Welcher.
Good afternoon, Ms. Green here. I'm bringing forth the May list of procurements that exceed $250,000 for approval.
Wayne, since, this is kind of the first time we've done this, can you, not necessarily walk through each one, but can you just kind of maybe highlight a couple of the particulars and kind of maybe, talk about the explanation under justification of solicitation, because I had a question about it. I got my questions answered, but I'm thinking maybe some of the other board members. I don't need you to go through every one, but if you would just maybe point out a few, and then if the committee members have any questions, we can deal with any specifics.
Okay, we can start with item 1 there. That's services requested by the academic side, and those services are exempt from the competitive process. So we didn't have to go out with a solicitation on that one. The next item on there is for our leasing of multifunctional devices to support our schools and offices throughout the district. That was solicited. We issued a request for proposal.
Help her answer the phone.
Excuse me? Is there a question? Okay. And that was solicited. We put out a request for proposal, and it was awarded to RICO. So that was done in a competitive arena. I'm just going to skip down the list there. The next item.
You don't need to do all of them. I just wanted to make sure that the board, the committee members understood what the terminology meant, because I wasn't sure myself.
Okay,
So,
well, like as I was saying, some of those items in the justification column, we have the board exemptions, or either they were solicited, which we list the solicitation number. And also there are some purchases that was done off of state contract, and we have the state contract number.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you mind backing up a little bit and remind me, like, I just want to make sure I understand the intent of, what the board wants from us as far as reviewing these items. Because I'm presuming most of them are, well, whether they're part of the capital budget or the operating budget is a different question, but presumably they're already budgeted items, or they're included in our reporting process. Are they wanting us to be focused on looking at vendors, or like what are we supposed to be looking for on this list?
I'm gonna let probably Don answer that question, but Ken, if you remember, a month or so ago, the committee was briefed on a misinterpretation of the procurement code, and we were asked to, at that point, to ratify. Well, now the board, the CCSD board, has requested that any contract over $250,000 have to come to the board for approval. And before they can go to the board, they have to come through audit and finance. And I'm going to let Don answer the question about what we are supposed to be looking for.
Yeah, so typically in these governmental organizations, there's a dollar threshold that if that threshold is exceeded, as Ms. Green said, then the governing body has the responsibility for approving those procurements. We haven't followed that pattern for a few years here, and so the board wanted to re-implement that process that they had in the past. I don't remember what the dollar threshold was. Seemed like I think it was like $50,000 at some point. But anyway, typically what happens then is that any procurement that comes through, going to the board, coming through the audit and finance committee, the committee needs to ensure that that whatever procurement process that should have been followed has been followed. So Wayne just highlighted 2 or 3. He said that there's an item that's from the academic side that's exempt from the procurement code per the board policy. So if there was something coming through that is not exempt from that procurement process, and we staff is showing that it's exempt, then you would need to question that. And so it's a very limited number of types of procurements that come through that would come through without going through some type of procurement process. He mentioned the estate contract. So we have a number of items that we can purchase off the state contract. So that's one thing you need to be taking a look at. And the second thing is just taking a look at price. There might be a little bit some challenges there as the committee, but if there's something looks out of whack in terms of fair fair and reasonable in terms of price. I would imagine you would look at that also. And then also the, especially with the, in operations with the contracts for construction, those construction programs have already been approved, the projects themselves, but just the procurement has not, just making sure that there's an alignment between what's coming in through from the procurement to issue a contract that's aligned with what the board has already approved in terms of the projects themselves.
Does that answer your question, Kent?
I think it does. It sounds like the priority really is ensuring that the process was appropriate. So if there's only 3 or 4 of these that have board exemptions, the rest of them were either competitive bid or state contract. A few that are change orders. If that's, I just want to make sure we're doing what the board expects and wants of us. So thank you for that.
Are there any other questions about the list?
I'm not sure if this is the right format for the question, but for having this process that kind of blew up on our procurement side, the board would not see these purchases. So some of them are kind of interesting. Is there going to be an opportunity to discuss the purchases, not the process? I mean, I guess what sticks out to me is, are we paying one company $4 million for one service, for educational services? And I don't want to waste this time if this isn't the time to do it. But I mean, some of these are some things that are pretty interesting things that I don't know that we would have ever seen if y'all weren't forced to bring these to us.
I think that the time to ask those questions would be now, Cindy.
I think you're talking about the leading educators contract.
Yeah, is that how much we pay leading educators?
That is for a 2-year contract through the end of the ESSER term. So it'd be for fiscal year 23 and for fiscal year 24. Leading educators has averaged around 1.5 million annually since we started that contract. What they're doing is that they provide high touch on the ground support for our acceleration schools. So the first year it was just around math and the PLC piece. So they actually have staff that they've hired for us. And then now they're the ones who are doing the reading curriculum and the PLC piece. So given it's going to be funded through ESSER, we asked them to put together the full term of the contract through 2024, at which point we would reevaluate the ongoing partnership with leading educators.
So I think my question is, I'm trying to figure out, is that the total cost for the services they provide, or is that how much we pay them? And then we're also paying staff to also help provide the services?
Well, we're paying the acceleration team, Jackie Haynes, and Kaylee, and a secretary. Those are general operating fund staffing positions, but that's the full term of leading educators.
So then we don't pay teachers to execute these programs. This includes leading educators bringing in their staff. There's no additional cost.
There are additional costs for acceleration schools that are in different places of the budget. So right
now, it's referring to leading educators. Is this is that the full nut, or does that
that's the full nut for the next 2 years? That's correct.
Thank you. That's what I was asking.
Thank you, Ms. Belcher, for that. Are there any other questions? If not, I will entertain a motion. They are requesting approval of the project list. So that's what is before us.
So moved.
Second.
I'm sorry, hold on just a minute.
Which item are you on?
I'm still on the contract.
Approval of projects.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The 250, yeah. So did we get a motion?
Yeah, and I second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Joyce, I abstain.
Okay. So noted. Okay, the next item is the monthly capital projects report. So,
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Ms. Green. I'm happy to report on the March 2002 report. Our sales tax collections for this month were $2.8 million above the 2% projected cash flow. For the expenditures for the 10 through 16 capital building program were $22,000. The expenditures for the 17 through 22 capital building program were $2.9 million. The expenditures for the 23 through 28 capital building program were $2 million. The capital maintenance 8% funding was $135,000. And the fixed cost of ownership 22 program is wrapping up soon. And we have commenced the fixed cost of ownership 23 program. Are there any questions that I can answer for anyone?
No questions. Thank you, Ms. Costello.
Thank you.
Moody's credit rating. Ms. Carlin?
Yes, hi, thank you, Ms. Green. Hello, everyone. Moody's Investor Service issued a credit opinion on April 8th, 2022 for the Series 2022 bond anticipation notes. These bonds were sold last week on April 27th. The district continues to maintain a AA2 stable rating due to our healthy financial operations, our close budget oversight, and our consistent increases to fund balance. And this is presented just for information only.
Are there any questions of the committee on Moody's report?
Well, I just wanted to commend you all as a team for continuing to have this strong rating. It's really, really excellent, and it's really important. But I also would reiterate, the risk if we were to jeopardize this rating, obviously would increase our costs substantially. And so I guess my only question, and we could do this offline, but I'd be interested if Moody's, they reference comparative districts that they're comparing us to for some of these ratios. It would be interesting if they'd be willing to share with you what those competitive districts are and what the metrics look like for those comparable schools, which would then be really helpful to us as we look out long-term planning. The couple of the factors they mentioned that could lead to a downgrade, we want to be tracking those in our own projections, that we're not pushing ourselves to metrics that would allow them to put us in a downgrade. Because obviously if they were to just even put us on alert, sometimes it's harder to walk back an alert than it is to stay out of getting there. So if you're able to get that, I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, I made a note. I'll do that and follow up.
Thanks.
So Jackie, when you follow up, start with the PFM, let them know what the request is, and which makes sense, and then let's go start with them, please.
Sure. Yes, sir.
But congratulations again.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? So maybe we'll just put that on the agenda until we can get an answer as just a reminder. Is that all right with y'all? Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. The next item is the monthly financial report. Ms. Carlin, you can continue.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Green. So included in your packet is the March 22 financial update for general operating fund. The first column, of numbers represents revenues received and expenditures spent through March 31st. Under the revenue section, actual revenues received to date are $517 million, and this includes local tax revenues of $365 million and state revenues of $140 million. The third column indicates our estimates at year end. The estimated revenues at year end is $605 million. And this is $600.4 million higher than what was reported on the February financial update, as shown in the prior month estimate column for total projected revenues. And this increase is from local property taxes. The estimated year-end revenues are $8.2 million over the FY22 board-approved budget of $597 million. Under the expenditure section, in the first column, total expenditures to date are $388 million. The third column shows the estimated expenditures at year end at $613 million. And this is $1.5 million lower than what was reported on the February financial update, as shown in the prior month estimates column for total projected revenues. And this decrease is from salaries and benefits, as well as the salaries and benefits from the mask mandate. The estimated year-end expenditures are $5.5 million below the FY22 budget of $618 million. And this is mostly due to vacancies and budgeted reserves that were not used at 7-day enrollment. So overall, the approved budgeted use of fund balance is $21 million, and that is, you'll see that in column 4. And we estimate we will use approximately $7.4 million in fund balance. And this is less than what was reported on the February financial update. Based upon the estimates through March 31st, the use of fund balance is $7.4 million, with 13.7 projected to roll back into fund balance. And this concludes the financial update for March 2022.
Okay, are there any questions?
Nope.
Did I hear somebody about to ask a question? Okay. If not, this is provided for information. Okay, thank you, Ms. Carlin. Mr. Kennedy, talk to us about ESSER 3.
So what you have before you is a table that lays out the next line of spending for the ESSER 3. Couple points before I go through the items themselves. Back in February, I briefed the school board on the process that we would use as we do with ESSER 3 expenditures. That staff would determine which items that need to be expended and that we need to execute on. We would bring a list of those items, linking those to the district's priorities, and bring those to the Audit and Finance Committee, and then take it on to the school board. We followed that process in March. If you recall, we brought to the committee 3 items, $14.3 million for expansion of mental health services using ESSER 3 dollars. There's $1.something million to put in a couple of prototypes for broadband expansions in the couple of rural sections of the county. And then also $3.something million from the human resource efforts to be able to incentivize student teachers that were teaching in our schools while they're still in college, and to incentivize them to come to work for us in the fall. So that took place, and now we took that to the Audit and Finance Committee and then presented that to the board, and then now we're executing on those expenditures. So this is a similar, the same process, not similar, same process. What we have here, at the last board meeting, we presented an update to the full board on the ESSER 3 strategies, and so here these expenditures are related to those strategies that we briefed the board. So on the table schedule there, you see we have the various pillars. On the pillar 1, district-wide program to purchase materials, and it says EL, that's our reading curriculum, and so materials for that, $1.4 million. Sticking with pillar 1, district-wide programs with says MLL, 1,000 language learners. So these are students that are coming in from other countries whose English is not their first language, and are trying to put in programs to support their educational growth. And then you can see the next 3 here on the high quality teachers and leaders, district-wide programs for acceleration school bonuses. And this is primarily to attract and retain staff and teachers within those our acceleration schools. District-wide programs on pathways to teaching programs and certification programs. So this is to be able to go out and bring in people that are not in the teaching profession, that have an interest in the teaching profession, and how then do we provide that financial support to do that. And then the last one in that section there, high quality teachers leaders, is the leadership pipeline program that's being developed, ensuring that we have future leaders to be able to lead in various parts of the district. And then, so that is the district-wide programs. And then also back in March, April, at the April 25th board meeting, we presented to the school board all of the school-based proposals for ESSER $3 that came in from 1st of April that were vetted by central office and collaborated between central office and school principals in their communities. We posted all those proposals on our website last Thursday or last Friday, but late last week. So all those proposals are out there. And so the $13 million on school level programs is to allow those schools to begin to initiate and execute on their plans, primarily beginning with recruiting for additional staff that's part of their plans. So a total of $22 million on this round, 13 of it is for school-based programs, and the remainder is for these district-wide programs that support the district as a whole and all our schools. So what questions do you have?
Any questions from anyone in the committee? My question, Dawn, is on those initiatives that involve hiring additional staff.
Mhm.
And I see it says 2 years. Is the plan that with the funding for those 2 years that will take care of the need? And if not, does that then become, will they then become dependent upon general operating funds to continue to fund those positions?
Well, so I would say in some instances, the needs would be taken care of. In other instances, the needs would not be taken care of within this time period with these resources. And so now that we have the plans in place, we have funding associated with those plans. We have processes to track both track right now the expenditures of those plans along funding as well as a timeline. And staff is involved in setting up a set of metrics or measures to track program effectiveness. And so for those programs that I would say that proved to be effective, we would have to try and figure out, and we haven't done this yet, but that'd be the next step, figure out how do we have a sustainability plan to make that a reality. And then for those programs where the metrics show that they were not effective, I would say there would be no need to continue staffing.
Joyce, may I ask a question?
Sure.
So actually, Joyce asked my first question, but a little more pointedly, are you advertising these as temporary positions that will end with the end of the ESSER funding? Or are these people going in with an expectation that from their perspective, they're applying for a job they plan to have until they're no longer good at it? Because a rough thumbnail sketch, you're looking at about $10 million in salaries that we're going to have to figure out how to pay on October 1st, 2023 or 2024, I'm sorry.
So Mrs. Coates, most of the positions are classroom or school-based positions. For example, in the Pathways programs where I have various initiatives, the individuals hired will be in allocated positions. We are certainly, like every district across the nation, have a shortage of teacher and teacher candidates. So from that perspective, because the majority of these folks are certified, we will have a need, and I can only imagine that they will be in general operated GOF funded positions or other types of funding sources.
So this school level program support staff, you intend to have those become, one of the requirements is those 130 odd people must be certified to teach? I'm looking specifically at the school support staff.
Some of those positions are certified. There are some that are classified support, but we've continued this year to have issues when it comes to finding talent in both areas. And I don't see that ending, not that we aren't going to be successful in recruiting, but it is a real challenge. So I think with attrition, the number of folks who are retiring or considering retirement, I feel that we'll be able to place folks into permanent positions when needed.
And then but to place them in permanent positions assumes that we will no longer be exercising those school support staff programs. This is staff, you see what I'm saying? This is not teachers we're hiring. This is staff we're hiring to execute additional programs. If we
Right.
put that staff in the classroom, either we're not going to be doing those programs or we have to hire another set of staff. You can't have teachers and support staff doing the same thing at the same time.
Correct.
So have we gotten that far down the road that we know what's going to happen to that roughly $13 million in salaries in 2 years
No.
in the
I have
terms of
not.
the work they're trying to accomplish?
So we have not, Ms. Coates. So as you know, the plans were just put in place last month. There's a series of processes that we're going through to do different types of analysis, different types of project planning, different types of measuring expected outcomes, establishing what those outcomes are, and then measuring those, and then over the next year or so, get to a point where we know where we might be headed towards the end and how we plan for that. So we're not,
Okay, and
not fully there yet, but understand the point.
yeah, and the next two questions are kind of quicker. You have over $6 million in the procurement that we just approved for that are ESSER coded. Are they included in this 22 million that you're spending, or should we say that you're spending 26 million, given the procurement stuff you're buying that we just approved plus this? Is this embedded in it or additional?
Some of requested last time, Ms. Coates. So for example, the expansion of the ELA materials, the request is the 250, but we'd put that in a request that already came to the board for spending down on ESSER 3 to the Audit and Finance Board.
I was more or less referencing the 6.4 million that are in what we just approved for the procurement projects over 250,000. Like three action items ago, we just approved $6.4 million in ESSER spending. Is that included in this report or in addition to this report?
I would say, well, first of all, I would say no. I can go back and I can go and verify, but I would say no. So this report here shows whatever the number is, $22 million, and then like I said, $6 million worth of non-staff. And so once we go through this process here, we go through go through a procurement process, and then once we go through the procurement process, anything that's on this list that's greater than 250,000 would come through the that procurement approval process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, that information that is provided for information as we go through this process with the ESSER funds. The next item is the first reading of the 23 budget. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go through this as opposed to the CFO. And the only reason why is because CFO this is our second day back to work from maternity leave. So welcome back, Ms. Williams. And but if the future presentation will be from her, but I'm going to walk through this, and so that's the only reason why I'm walking through it. Although she and I have been working on this over the weekend, so she's definitely familiar with it. In fact, she was responsible for having all these numbers pulled together. So what I would as an introductory comments to this, going through the numbers, I'm going to make 2 points. One, well, let me make 3 points. Number one, the recommendation is the scenario 3. So this is what's being recommended to the Audit and Finance Committee, scenario 3, which is a 9.1 mil increase. So point 2 is that this budget, this proposed budget here for the first reading, with a couple of exceptions, is essentially the same budget as the fiscal year 22 budget. It's essentially the same budget. So in prior years, going back a number of years, for each budget year that we've come to the board and the Audit and Finance Committee, that we've had a series of expansions. So, you know, we had the mission critical, we had the acceleration schools, we had other initiatives that were geared towards trying to address the academic aims and needs of the district. This budget, with a couple of exceptions, which I'll go through, this budget has no expansion. So this is the budget that's essentially the fiscal year 22 budget, and what we've increased here over the 22 budget are things that either required increases, which I'll walk through, And those are primarily staffing, for instance, like the teacher step increase, as an example, but I'll go through each one. And then the other section, that's an increase primarily associated with increase in non-teaching staff salaries. There's one exception on the learning services. There's $3.1 million for an expansion for 39 positions for special needs or special education. And these are requirements on how we serve the needs of special needs children. And so the people that run that program, along with Ms. Belcher, they analyze what the needs of our students are, and then we have to, by law, fund those needs. And so that's an expansion, but it's not an expansion of in the sense of a new program, a new initiative. It's just meeting compliance requirements and meeting the needs of our students that have special requirements. And then the other section there's a $6.6 million increase, which I'll highlight in the budget in a few minutes, but that is since operations expansion. And the vast majority of that $6.9 million, $6.6 million is for required increase in contract costs. So we have contracts that we have let with different companies. They have escalation clauses in those contracts. And so the vast majority of that $6.6 billion is for that. Other than those two items that really are not expansion items, there are no differences between this budget and the fiscal year 23 budget, with the exception of adding costs for salaries for fringe benefits that's mandated by the state, again, which I'll walk through. The third point I'll make, in the April Audit and Finance Committee, I presented several scenarios on potential budget. The scenario that I landed on was this one that's shown here is scenario 2, which is a 6.3 mil increase. And so we still don't know what the state budget is going to be. It'll be next week, looks like, before we have that. We have a good sense about what the local revenue will be. But in order to close this budget for fiscal year 23 without making a significant reduction in staff, in terms of reduction in staff, then it requires this 9.1 mil increase. So with those 3 points, I'll walk through some of the details. And I might go back and forth between scenario 2 and scenario 3 just for comparison. So on the first page then here, the summary page. So first of all, a geographical view of the document itself. The first page is the summary page. Then I have a few pages that show break those summary dollars out into some details. And then the last section indicates based on assumed assessed property values, the impact of a 9.1 mil increase on various taxpayers. So on scenario 3, coming over to the numbers themselves, it shows projected revenue for 23 at $645 million. And a base expenditure of $614 million. That base expenditure is is where we expect to end the year. So it's not adding to. It's not building upon the budget from fiscal year 22. It's not like we're taking the budget from fiscal year 22 and building upon that. We are estimating where we're going to end the year in 22, and we're building from that point. As Jackie briefed a few minutes ago, Jackie Carlin briefed a few minutes ago, we're not going to use all the fund balance that we had anticipated. That means our expenditures won't be as high as we had expected. So when you subtract what we project as $645 million worth of revenue, we subtract from that the $614 million worth of expenditures. That gives us $31 million under the scenario 3 to apply to new expenses, additional expenses for the fiscal year 23 budget. So if you take a look at the 3 columns, all 3 columns, where it shows $31 million under scenario 3. If you come over to scenario 2, that number is $22 million. And the difference between those two numbers is the difference of the 6.3 mil increase versus the 9.1 mil increase. And a mil this year is roughly a little over $3 million, valued at a little over $3 million. So with that increase, it's I think it's $8.5 million, something like that, that's generated by that additional revenue. And then over on scenario 1, where it shows no millage increase, you can see that there would be only $3.2 million to allocate against expenses for next year. Then the next section talks about what those expenditure increases are. The $31,457,000 required expenditure increases, and I'll go through details on the second page on that in a second. We have a reduction in the mission critical items of $1.4 million. And then we have this learning service expansion of $3.1 million, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. That's for the 39 positions in special education needs. And then other considerations of $12 million. And so that would be more discretionary. So required increases and the increases that are not required. So not required 12 million. Again, I'll go through the details. So you sum that up, and the total increases for next year budget over this year's budget is $45 million. And then how do we then balance that? Well, the first one is that we apply the revenue from above, where it says funds available, $31,135,000 against that $45 million, and that still leaves a gap of roughly $14 million as shown in the next section here below the $45 million. So the first one, $4 million, is the same number I presented last month, that we have identified specific areas within this year's budget in non-salary line items that we're going to not spend, and we're going to save the $4 million and apply that, it'll roll into fund balance, and then we'll apply that to the FY23 budget. Same strategy we've used for several years. The next line item is similar, except it's salaries instead of non-salary savings. And then we've instituted a hiring freeze that was effective, I'm not sure when, but a few weeks ago back in April. And so we anticipate saving $3 million from that, and then rolling that into fund balance at the end of this year to apply against expenditures next year. And then the last one here under scenario 3 is the use of fund balance. So this would be whatever the fund balance is right now, which I'll go through that in a second. We would use $7 million of that to help to balance this budget. So the first two, $4 million and $3 million, we're taking explicit steps in this current year's budget to reduce costs, and then that will increase the fund balance, and then we will take it out of fund balance. And this $7 million, $7,230,000 that's already in fund balance. So you take a look at the fiscal year 21 financial statements of where it shows the fund balance of $145 million, that $7 million would come from that $145 million. And so if under those steps, then we would have a balanced first reading of the budget. Now, before I get into the details of expenditures, on the bottom of this first page, I want to show you the impact on the fund balance. So currently, and if you take a look at the district's fiscal year 21 financial statement, the balance sheet, you would see $145 million in fund balance. That's currently in our financial statements. The $21 million below that is what's in the FY22 budget, the current year's budget, that we said that we would use to balance next year's budget. I mean, the 22 budget, 21 million. As Jackie briefed on the monthly financial statement, instead of using 21 million, we're only going to use $7.4 million. And so we would have an additional, there's the numbers right there in the next section. Actual fund balance 145, projected use of fund balance for fiscal year 22 is 7.4. So we budgeted $21 million in fund balance. We only expect to use 7.4. So that means that gives us a difference to be able to add that into fund balance. So when you make the subtraction there, that means that before we take into account the reductions in the deliberate cost savings for this year, our fund balance would be $137,888,000. However, because we're going to have the two savings that I talked about in the non-salaries and the hiring freeze of $7 million, then we add that to the 137. And so we would expect at the end of this fiscal year 22, when we close the books, that we would have a fund balance of $144.9 million. So we ended last fiscal year at $145 million. And so what this shows is that we would end this year at $144 million, where the plan was to end at $124 million. And out of that 144, we are proposing in this budget to take out the $7 million that we add in from the salary savings and the non-salary savings, and an additional $7 million out of the fund balance to help balance the budget. And therefore, the projected fund balance at the end of fiscal year 23, so June of next year, under this scenario 3, that we'll have a budgeted fund balance of $130,887,000. Questions on that before I get into the details of the expenditures?
What is the formula for determining the fund balance? In their formula?
So there's a formula for determining how much should be committed and how much should be either in unassigned or assigned to make sure that we have what's called by the GFLA, GASB, General Accounting Standards Board, what the stabilization fund for committed. And so that formula says that we will essentially have the average of you take the average. You take the expenditures from the last 2 years. So what we've done, we've taken the expenditures from FY21, the expenditures for FY20, expected expenditures this year of 22, and we average those in the average of 2 months worth of expenditures. And so I did the calculations over the weekend. I'm not sure I have this up any place, but I think the number right now, if you take a look at our fiscal year 21 financial statements, those two numbers combined, can you pull that? Oh, I think it's $90 million. And when I did the calculations a couple of days ago, we would be required to have $98 million.
So,
but certainly we are paying attention to that and make sure that we have by board policy what should be set aside for essentially an emergency fund if something some disaster hits the district and we need to have funds right away. That's what that committed. And committed. The state requires 1 month, essentially 8% of that of the expenditures, and where the GFOA recommendation is twice that. And so our board policy reflects what's required by GFOA, recommended by GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association.
okay.
Don, this is a point though where if Moody's would share with us some of that data, it would be helpful because there's a minimum 1 month, there's a kind of rule of thumb 2 months, but I wonder if Moody's might be holding us to a slightly higher standard to maintain the excellent credit rating that we have. So I think that'd be helpful to know.
That makes sense.
And another question regarding the contractual commitment, what I can't remember exactly. You quoted a figure of adding to the required contractual obligations that we have. Was it 6 million?
6.6.
6.6 million. So have y'all had a chance, Don, to really analyze those contracts to make sure that they continue to be needed? I know it's all over the district, but has anybody had an opportunity to kind of take a deep dive into those contractual commitments?
Well, they're not primarily all over they're not all over the district for the most part. They're primarily in operations. So these are like,
Legal.
I'm assuming, let me see if Jeff is.
I'm on the line.
Yes, can you walk through some of that, Jeff?
Yes, sir. So we have an annual escalation clause in all of our service contracts. So grounds maintenance, transportation, custodial, fire hood maintenance, all of those. All of those have a requirement to escalate. The big ticket item in this year's budget is custodial. It has to be rebid, will be awarded at the start of this coming new year, January of 2023. We are holding together this current system on a shoestring. We get complaints from schools on a regular basis. The three custodial contractors are having an incredibly hard time staffing because it's not based on the current market. And so we're expecting a significant increase when we re-award that contract to provide a minimum salary to those employees that meets what's in the community right now. So that's the biggest ticket item is custodial. So that entire amount, there's an individual line item that represents a dollar amount that's been looked at primarily by Mr. Kromps, but in the case of transportation, obviously Mr. Lynch as well. And we could certainly review those line item by line item if needed.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a question on the hiring freeze. You said you had savings from a hiring freeze. So are there specific positions that are frozen, or because an earlier statement was made that you had problems hiring teachers? So you have a freeze, but then you have a problem hiring. How does that play out?
Hi, that's definitely a very good question. So for our school-based staff, we froze positions, but we continue to recruit for staff. So if we find a hard to fill area like a math teacher or another teacher, we would make an exception. But the other part of that is that because if a teacher or a school-based staff member who's less than 240 days starts work now, they only have 30 plus days, maybe 30 plus days of pay for the rest of the school year. So a lot of times that can cause a financial hardship. So folks will wait till the first of the school year. Then for central office staff, most are 240 days. We're monitoring any that maybe need to be filled that have been difficult to fill, but overall we froze everything. And certainly division heads can reach out to us if there's a need to fill a couple of positions if needed.
Thank you.
So Ms. Green, just going back quickly to your question about what's required in the fund balance. So the board policy says that we take the average of the 2 years on a month basis, and we have to have 150% of that in the committed fund balance. And so the calculation for fiscal year 21 the current balance sheet, it shows $68 million that's in there, $68 million. And then the remaining amount has to be of the requirement has to be in we have it in an assigned fund balance, and that's $23 million. So we have $90 million that's set aside for emergency situations within the district on the financial statement. The calculation for next year, those numbers are 74 million in committed and 24 million in another category, but also identified as emergency for the future expenditures. So that's the total of $98.8 million. So it goes from $90 million to $98.8 million.
That's for fiscal year 23.
That's what when we in this year FY22. So when the auditors look at and in Moody's, the rating agency, they look at they don't look at the future. They will take a look at what our financial statements are. And so it'll be financial statements as of 6/30/22.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Any other questions for Don at this point before he continues?
You said you were going to break down the 12 million and other considerations. You'll be breaking that down as to what that comprises?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, so let me do that now. Let's go through the details. So if you go to page 2 of this handout, staying with scenario 3, the top numbers there, top sections, simply repeats from the previous page, the summary revenue, summary expenditures, and the funds available, 31 million. Then the next section that says required increases, it lists what those increases are. So the first one says teacher staff increase $4.5 million. So that is a state requirement that we give a step increase to all teachers, and that amount for all of our teachers is 4.5 million. The next item, teacher salary increase, 9.6 million. So under the House version of the budget that was passed back last month, they have a $4,000 increase for teacher salaries. If you look at column 1, scenario 1, that you see a $19 million number. That's the cost for the district to give all of our teachers a $4,000 increase, 19 and plus benefits, $19 million. What's in scenario 3 is 50% of that increase, or $2,000, and that cost is 9.6 million. The next item, retirement increase. This is the district's share of the increase in retirement costs that we pay for our employees. That $3 million or $2,979,000, it's a percentage increase that's mandated by the state budget. So again, we have no option but what to make that increase. The same thing with the health and dental increase. There's a percentage that's mandated by the state, and that percentage works out to $1.7 million for CCSD. The charter schools in Meeting Street, we're still working through the details of that funding formula. It's related largely to what the changes in the state funding formula for K-12. And so, but we're estimated at 5.6. And so that, but whatever it is, whatever that change in the charter school funding formula, it will still be based on essentially the number of students that are enrolled in our charter school. So that piece won't change. And then the next one here, the next 2 line items, I think it was 2 years ago, the board voted to charge essentially a fee to all of our charter schools to fund the position to manage charter schools. That fee was at 0.25% of charter school payments. And that's the negative $143,000 there. So that's saying we would reduce expenditures because we would, when we allocate funding to charter schools, we would subtract out that 0.25%, and that generates $143,500. So 2 years ago, that calculation was based on what it would cost to hire and do fringe benefits for a specific level of employee, a director. The $176,000, but above that, that's the current cost. So cost $176,000, and we would, based on the board motion that was adopted, we would be able to collect from the charter schools $143,000. The next item, property and flood insurance. So that's simply that increases in cost in carrying insurance on our properties. And then the next item, the contractual obligations and other must do's, the $6.6 million. That's what Jeff just talked about a few minutes ago, primarily the operations contracts that have cost escalators. And if you need to go through the details on that, I have that on my computer. But when I went through that list of contracts, it's quite a few, but it's all have cost escalators.
So is the 6.6, is that just the escalation, piece of the contract, or is that the total value?
Oh,
of
no,
the
those,
contract
are-
plus the escalation.
no, those the increase, the escalated cost. Jeff, you want to talk any more?
Yes,
about
sir. A portion of it is the escalated cost in the annual contracts. A significant portion is the rebid for the custodial contract. So it's an expected increase in the overall value of the contract. We also have, in addition to those contracts, we have a couple of other must-pay bills, including compliance with a new Fire Safety Act, Act 256, which requires additional contract support and labor. So again, each of these has a line item that adds up to that total, value of 6.59 million.
So your maintenance contract, is that for the entire county?
Yes, ma'am. The contracts are district-wide. In some cases, there's multiple contracts that handle a service. Like custodial, we have 3 contractors. Grounds maintenance, we have 3 contractors. It's applied to all 3. But everything from, grounds, elevator maintenance, all of these items are maintained. We maintain those with contract services.
And you think that district-wide, you're going to get a contract with everything else that for 6.5 million? I'm just.
That's the increase.
It seems a little low for that type of contract.
Those are just the increases.
Oh, okay. But I thought he said that was the bidding of the new.
It's
contract.
the bidding of the new custodial, but an increase over the base
Okay.
contract.
Okay.
So we have the existing custodial contract that's in the budget. This is
Okay.
just the additional amount of money that we're expecting to have to pay
Okay.
with the new bid. Yes, ma'am.
Got it.
Yep.
And
Any
another
other questions on the
question,
required? I'm sorry.
just had a question on the teacher salary increases. The $4,000 per that you mentioned, was that mandated by the state or is that recommended by the state?
You mean the teacher step increase of 4.5?
No, the teacher, you said there was a $4,000.
The teacher salary. So there in the House version, of the budget that the House has passed, the Senate has not passed this version. They have a mandate that there's a $4,000 minimum, $4,000 minimum that teachers would receive. So currently the minimum for a starting teacher is $36,000. CCSD's minimum for first teacher that's just starting out without a master's degree is, instead of 36,000, is 41,000. So we already pay above the minimum. So in that case, CCSD would not be required by state to do any increase for teachers. And so that is not a state requirement, but the reality is this, the state has way they have communicated across statewide. There are teachers statewide, including our teachers here, that expect a $4,000 increase. Now, I've met with teacher groups here locally, explained to them what the reality is. So it's not a requirement, but as Mr. Brigman or Bill would say, teacher recruitment is a real challenge. I've talked with teachers and I know what some of the challenges that they're having. So although it's not a requirement, I would say we're certainly a recommendation I'm making.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on the required?
I've got a question. I know you were trying to explain this, and I'm sorry, I somehow confused myself. So I apologize because I know we're backtracking, but in scenario 1 with no millage increase, the line, the row that's the teacher salary increase, it's 19 million. Why does that go down again for the 2 scenarios where we do have millage increase? Why does that come down from the 19 to 9.5?
So when the state first started its budget back in the winter, that's when this $4,000 teacher salary increase came up. And so we did the calculation here. And again, for us to do a teacher salary increase at $4,000 level and plus benefits is the $19,000. And so what the next 2 scenario 2 and scenario 3 assumes, instead of a $4,000 teacher salary increase, it's 50% of that are $2,000.
So I guess where I'm headed is, so you're only presuming a millage increase if that happens, or are you saying scenario one should be adjusted now as well, in a sense?
So the recommendation that we're making to the Audit and Finance Committee is scenario 3.
Okay.
Okay. So scenario 1, scenario 2 are for comparison purposes. At the April Audit and Finance Committee, I focused on scenario 2.
Got
now
it.
I'm focusing on scenario 3 with a recommendation.
Yeah, so scenario one's kind of moot now, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay, sorry. I'm with you now.
But you are also assuming in 2 and 3 that the increase will be $2,000 for teachers as opposed to, is that what the Senate approved?
No, the Senate hasn't approved the budget yet. So the Senate will approve that budget over the next few days, sometime probably next week. And then, it may be this week, but that's a reconciliation, as you know, between the two, because the House and the Senate, because they're different. But the Senate hasn't approved anything, but they are recommending 2,000.
And if that gets increased back to 4,000.
So for us, for us here locally,
I know.
no, for us here locally, well, we can probably just sort of like discard what either the House or the Senate or the final budget is, because whatever it is that they recommend in their budget, in the state budget for minimum teacher salary, we're already above that. And so the local decision, and this is what the legislators tell, this is what they're communicating, the decision to increase a teacher's salary, if you're already above the minimum, is totally a local decision, a local school board decision, or for those school districts that the county government make the decision for them.
So would it make more sense to just use the 9.5 million across the board in all the scenarios, if that is the position that the county is taking, that you would do a 2,000 as opposed to the 4,000? I think having that 19 million in that first scenario tends to make one believe that that's almost like a mandatory. So if the decision was made just to go with the 2,000, would it not, from a comparison purposes, would it not be better to have that at 9.5?
Well, a couple of points. One, that's the recommendation is only on scenario 3, and then so again, the state has communicated widely that especially early in the early spring, late winter, that there's this idea of $4,000 teacher increase. And so I thought it was important for the Audit and Finance Committee as well as the board to understand what the state's initial position was in the dollar impact that would have if we made a decision here locally to honor that $4,000 number. But certainly when we take this is for discussion purposes here, but when we take for first reading of the budget, we would not be taking scenario 1. And let's at this point, I'm assuming that we move forward with scenario 3. So then we would not be taking scenario 1 forward to the as part of the budget on first reading on May 23rd.
So may I ask a question, Joyce?
Sure.
So first off, just to calibrate, because I think it's worthy news, is that every teacher in our system under the scenario 3 is going to receive at least a $3,000 pay raise from their current salary to their next one. And I think that's good. And I think that's worthy. I think that's one of the reasons I wanted y'all to see the salary schedule, because sometimes it's when you have all these high numbers, you can forget that they really are divided out into squares. But at last year, we did the COLA and $1,000 on that budget. And then a couple of years ago, we did that. My only point is I'm not opposed to the adjustments of expanding the salary schedule to 30 years or bumping the 2,000 in every square, while they also get to go up a step. But at some point, Bill, this has to have an impact on your ability to hire. And we go through this conversation over and over and over every year, that no matter how much we add into the budget next year and during the school year next year, we keep hearing that you can't hire teachers. We're paying well above the state. And I know that our cost of living is higher, but my question is, when do we reach a point that these influxes have an impact?
So Mrs. Coates, so teacher salaries across not just South Carolina, across the nation are an issue when it comes to making sure we're paying teachers an affordable wage as a professional. Charleston, you hit the nail on the head. It compounds the issue with the cost of housing, the cost of living in Charleston. And many of our brand new teachers who are new to the profession, making $41,000 a year, have more than one job to make ends meet. I will continue to be an advocate for moving the teacher salary schedule to 50,000 or more over the next several years, because again, it's an ongoing issue. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing young folks who are being discouraged from becoming teachers for many reasons. But one of the main reasons is because of the salary and the ability to live off the salary, especially in our area.
So thank you, because you really calibrated it right then and there. All this conversation is you trying your best to get to 50,000 without the board and or the numbers becoming so exponential in 1 year that we all start bopping. But you're really thinking we need a teacher salary that is a $50,000 starting.
At minimum,
and I kind of think that's right.
I do. You remember in 2018-19, we adjusted the math salary schedule for high poverty schools. And we saw that was definitely a recruitment strategy, maybe not so much to get our young folks to consider teaching, but it definitely changed the playing field for us when it came to hiring experienced math teachers.
Well, didn't change it a whole lot because we're right back where we are. Yes, that's my fear, is that we keep making these tremendous investments, and then within a couple of years, we're right back to where we are again.
Right. And just respectfully, I'll say, you and you've been on the board for some time now. And when we rolled out the salary study for Palmer and Kay, we've never gone to 100% market for the non-teaching positions.
Right.
So we continue to revisit that. And anytime there aren't adjustments made due to the budget process, we lose ground there. So that's why I come to the table every year proposing increases to our salary structures.
Right. And I think that this is a workable increase. I think at some point we cannot continue to increase this budget by $45 million year over year and put that kind of economic pressure on the cost of living in Charleston County. And then it creates this self-fulfilling vortex that we're creating this economic pressure onto the cost of living of Charleston County. Ergo, we have to increase our expenses because of the cost of living. And I don't think this is I think this is a conversation which we need the administration to come to the board and begin that conversation months before the budget. But I don't know how long this system can sustain, where we in 5 years we've raised our portion of the millage 20 points in 5 years. If we approve the 9.1, we are a huge contributor to the cost of living increases in Charleston County. And then we say the cost of living increases are the reason we have to then turn around and keep increasing. And I just think at some point, I urge this district to have a truly substantive conversation about that, because we're increasing. The perception is these costs don't flow back to the consumer, but rent is exponentially out of control in Charleston County, and we are literally raising rents every time we raise taxes on non-owner occupied homes. That is not getting absorbed anywhere else. And I know I'm kind of preaching, but the second thing is we never have a substantive conversation of we increased it $30 million from the previous year to last year, and there was all of these things that were going to happen, and none of that's being discussed today. Did it happen? And now we're going to increase 40 more million next year. And I just would urge that at some point we have to have a much more substantive conversation. We're literally talking about one pot of money, not special revenue. The full budget will be over 1 billion if this gets approved. But I just felt like that needed to be said, because a couple of things pop out. We have these struggles, and we're literally doing a starting salary for a newly created executive director position that exceeds our revenue for the position. And that's what I see when I see that charter school executive director position. They're not going to get cheaper as the years go on. They're going to get more expensive. And we start these things out upside down. Just my observations. And I still struggle with I know that on the new funding formula, Charleston County is a bonus county. I've seen all the streams to all the districts, but I don't understand how a population of capped students, charter schools cannot grow their population. We have a $6,000 increase in cost. So I just think at some point we have to have a very substantive conversation that ties this to the fact that we're putting pressure on that economic system, and we have to at least acknowledge that. And we certainly have to start acknowledging that against what the educational things we're doing. Are they working? And I appreciate the pressure y'all are under. I just felt like that needed to be on the public record.
Thank you, Ms. Coates. Are there any questions from any other board, any of the other committee members? Okay, so Mr. Kennedy.
I need to continue.
Yeah.
Please, ma'am. So I will next go to the section below the required increases. The first number is a negative number, 1.4 million. I mentioned this earlier, that there was a reduction in some of the mission critical items. So that represents 1.4 million. The next number, 3.1, learning services expansion, that's related to the special needs students, staff that I talked about earlier. And then the next section here all relate to salary increases. We'll walk through those. So that's Ms. Stamps, you had asked earlier about the $12 million. And so this section I'm going through right now, that starts with learning services, that section represents that $12 million that you asked about. So here are the details. So the $3.1 million, as I mentioned a minute ago, on the human resources, move teacher cap to 30 years. So currently, if you're a teacher and you're in the system and you have 26 years of services, you don't get a salary increase beyond that. So if you're at 29 years, you won't recognize a salary increase. And so this $1.6 million is to move that cap up to 30 years. So if you're a 28 year or 29 year teacher, then you would see a salary increase. Non-teacher step at $2.2 million. And so the next two items here, the non-teacher step of 2.2 million and the maintain 97% of market, which is a COLA of 2.3. Those two numbers then combined ensures that we maintain the 97% of market for that. But the board last year approved the 97% of market based on the salary study that Bill mentioned. And so if we don't do this, then we would drop below that 97% of market. And if you recall also, there was encouragement by the board and the committee to actually move this year closer to the 100% of market because of the budget challenges. We elected to recommend maintaining 97%. So the $323,000 addresses the needs of our hourly employee, which are the lowest paid employees that in this particular category. So we're proposing to take the minimum hour salary up to $17 an hour, whereas we have some employees that are making $11.71 an hour. That's $323,000. Then on the next page, the last item is to remove the classified salary cap, and that's 452,000. So a few years ago, for a number of years actually, the an classified employee worked in a governmental agency other than the school district, and we hired them, and let's say they had 20 years worth of services, they would only get credit for 12 years, and so for pay purposes. And so over the last 2 years, we've increased that to 15 years of services, and then last year, 18 years. And so what this proposal is to remove that cap. So that then comprises the $12 million increase there. And then on that section and on the previous page, under that same, well, on that section, well, here you see all these blanks, but below the 452,000, these are coming from division chiefs for additional increases, expansions, if you will, that we are not recommending, at least in the first reading of the budget, until we understand what the final state budget might be coming out here in the next short period of time, hopefully. So a $12,000 increase for the other considerations. So we, again, just the total FY23 expenditure request, just a repeat of the summary page there, $45 million. Funds available using the $9.1 million, $9.1 million increase on scenario 3, $31 million. Remaining to balance is $14 million. And then below that, I repeat what I've already talked about, how we would balance the rest of the $14 million for those three items there. So that in the next page is a repeat. It's the fund balance. So it's just a repeat of what was on the summary page. So I don't need to go through that again, other than say that we had $145 million again in our fund balance in the fiscal year 21 balance sheet. And when under this scenario, when we close the books this year, we would be slightly under that at the 144.9 million. With the budget in fiscal year 23, 130.9 versus the budget that we had for this year. This is important. We had a budget for fiscal year 22 to end the fund balance at 124 million. And we, under this scenario, we would end instead at 130, almost 131 million. So before I get into the next section, the next and last section, any additional questions on this so far? All right. So the last section here is it's a 9.1 mil increase. 9.1 mil increase. What will be the impact on various taxpayers? So the first one is the owner occupied. So this is a person who own his or her house and live in it. It lives in it. And so assuming an assessed home property value of $200,000, the increase to that taxpayer would be zero at 9.1 mil. And the reason for that is there are two reasons for that. For one, we're not recommending an increase in the debt service millage. And then the taxpayer that owns his or her home and live in it, they're exempt from school district operation taxes. So regardless of what the millage is, there would be a zero tax impact to this taxpayer under any scenario. The next one is the non-owner occupied. This is a person who owns property, let's say a house, and that house is rented out. And so assuming an assessed home value of $100,000, first of all, that is not exempt from paying taxes on general operating fund. So that taxpayer would see at the bottom in yellow, would see an increase of $37.80 next year under this scenario. The next one, third one is a commercial property. So this is business property. That is a major category. That category is a major contributor to school district operation based on Act 388 that was enacted 14 years ago or so. So assuming assessed property value of $500,000 for every $500,000 of property, assessed property values, that increase would be $189. Excuse me 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I need to have Sean check something. But for an automobile, next sheet, on assuming assessed property value of $20,000, then the taxpayers would see a $7.56 increase. And I'm gonna have two sections in here. You know, so I'm going to have to apologize. I apologize. So those numbers that I just walked through are inaccurate. They are accurate, but they are for the 6.3 mil increase. I didn't realize I had two copies. So that's a 6.3 mil increase. So let me walk through the 9.1 mil increase. All right. So going through the same scenarios on the next page on owner occupied, that number is still zero. Again, if you live in your house, you pay zero taxes under any scenario. Under the house owner that rents the house out, that under the 9.1 scenario, that the increase would be $54.60, $54.60. And then for the commercial real estate property, assessed property values, at 500,000 for every 500,000, that increase would be $273 for the year. And then for the automobile, it would be $10.92. And then for the general operating fund, the personal property is $10,000. Personal property being, so like a business may own computers or whatever those personal properties are. So for every $10,000 assessed value, it'd be $9.56. So the first set I went through, which I didn't realize I had put in here, were on the 6.3 mil increase, which I had presented. I think I presented to the Audit and Finance Committee last month. Certainly I presented to the board, I think, last week. So what other questions? What questions do you have, or other questions you have?
So Don, I have one question. What is the average assessed value of a house in Charleston County? I know we're doing that for 100,000, but it's my understanding, and I want to make sure I'm correct on the assessed value. But in your conversations with the county, you read in the paper and everything and say the median house is 300 plus. Is that the assessed value?
It is not. So we can get you the average. The $100,000 that you referenced is for the person who's renting a house out. I think it's $200,000 for the owner occupied house in this scenario. But we can get the average, what that average is. But what you see in the newspaper is not assessed property values; it's the actual value of the real estate value of the house.
I understand the need to do the tax increase. I'm not saying that in any way. I just feel like we have to get very clear about the impact that it has. We know that 300 is not an assessed value, but we also know that using 100, which is what the district has done for the last 7 years, is also not an accurate indicator of how much an individual's rent will go up because of that. And I would like us to try to get a handle on some of that.
Yeah, we can do that.
Are there any other questions for Don, Mr. Kennedy, on? If not, are you finished, Mr. Kennedy? Is there anything else you need to tell us as it pertains to first reading of the budget?
So the only thing I would say that the first reading of the budget is not a final budget. This year is different than any year that I've been back since I've been back. Is that at this point in the first reading of the budget in the last few years, we had a better sense of what the actual revenue was going to be. So we still have that unknown out there as it relates to the state revenue. I'll be in Columbia Thursday with the superintendent's roundtable that the Secretary Spearman has, and I'm sure we'll get an update. So we will present these numbers to the board at the committee of the whole on Monday. If there's an update by then, I'll update the committee at that time. But otherwise, it would be a potential change. But it will come to the board for first reading on May 23rd. In any case, I would expect some changes before we go to the second reading because we don't know the revenues.
Okay, so the staff is requesting approval on first reading of the fiscal 23 budget using the 9.1 mil increase. Do I have a motion on that?
I'll motion it, but before I do want to make a comment, not to sound it to beat a dead horse, but I do hope that the committee or that the full board appreciates that even with the mill increase, we're projecting, a 15% dip in our fund balance. While I presume we can survive that for a year, we need to be really careful that this doesn't become a multi-year pattern that, it's going to very quickly jeopardize that credit rating. So I approve the budget and I approve the millage increase. Not that that's my approval, but I approve us recommending that. But hopefully that gets passed along to the full board.
Thanks.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Joyce, I'm going to abstain. I still have some concerns, not about the millage increase as much as the new positions that are just kind of keep seeping in. I think we've got to get a much better handle on that while we're in a financial crisis.
Okay. One abstention and that motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the executive session. If any of the committee members have any questions, comments about anything that we covered in the regular session of the meeting? If not, I thank you for those of you who need to leave. Thank you for your participation and your input. And I will ask that those of you who are not associated with the executive session, if you would leave at this time. Okay, so we are now back in the regular session. I will entertain a motion on item number 13, the District 4 contractual matter.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and the item 14 was for information purposes. So the board agenda items, Donna, you want to walk us through that? This is a test. I never have gotten it straight either, so don't feel bad.
Check marks.
Thank you. So back to see item 4, the Head Start FY23 COLA quality improvement applications. Item 5, the 2017 to 2022 capital program. Item 6, the 2023-28 capital program. Item 7, approval of projects greater than 250,000. Item, excuse me, item 8, 7, sorry. Item 8, monthly capital projects report. Item 10, monthly financial report. Item 11, S3 initiative. Item 12, first reading. And item 13, excuse me, district court contractual.
So would the board not need to know about Moody's rating?
If there's information, I mean, we could send it, but,
I mean, is it, I'm just asking, normal procedure would be that would just come to audit and finance and not go to the regular board?
I just thought, the reason I bring it to the Audit and Finance Committee so that they can understand how the rating agencies, how they view our financial position and what would cause either increase in our ratings or decrease in our ratings. So for me, it's discussion with the Audit and Finance Committee,
Okay.
but we can certainly send it as information to the full board. I think the only time I've sent it to the full board when we actually got an increase in our rating.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just was, just checking. Okay. No, we're not going to put it on. Okay, anything further from any member of the committee? If not, thanks as always for your participation, and the meeting is adjourned.